Hi, this is Allison Sheridan of the No Silicast podcast, hosted at podfeet.com, a technology podcast with an ever so slight Apple bias. Today is Sunday, November 9th, 2025, and this is show number 1070. Well, before we get started today, I want to make sure that the live audience knows there will be no live show next week on November 16th. Steve and I are off to Houston to help take care of the grandkids. I'd love to do the live show from there someday, but our son Kyle's house is pretty much all hardwood floors, so sound travels really, really well in that house. And there's 3 little tiny kids there. They do have a great study for recording, but we kind of need 2 rooms for the live show since Steve produces it and needs good sound as well. Anyway, you know you're going to get a show on time or even early, so don't worry your pretty little head about it. But please don't show up at podfeet.com/live at 5 p.m. until November 23rd. I have already recorded NC 1071. It's already in the can. It's ready to push publish, so I know it's going to happen. Eddie Tonkoi is a voice you've heard before, but he's under a new pseudonym. You heard him just last week with his dulcet tones telling us about his Shure MV7 Plus microphone. You're going to be hearing a lot from him over the next month or two as he's got even more terrific ideas for material for the No Silicast. He's written a terrific article for us about how he used the static site generator Hugo to create a website for his wife's books at Tonkoi.com. But you won't hear that until next week's show. After he sent us this relatively human-friendly explanation, I asked him if he'd up the nerd level and get into more details as a piece for Programming by Stealth. He loved the idea and recorded what I think might be the first solo episode of Programming by Stealth, entitled Building an Indie Author Site with Hugo by Eddie Tonkoi. We've already posted that as Tidbit 15 on the Programming by Stealth feed. If you're just nerd curious, you'll want to wait a week to hear the original version. But if you enjoy a little bit of coding, then the Programming by Stealth episode is for you. Thank you so much, Eddie, especially for recording 2 versions for us. Before I get started on my first article, I'd like to apologize if you follow the blog and saw a weird post go up that was asking you for a password. I was trying to test an idea with someone else, and I mistakenly thought that putting it behind a password would make it private. I was wrong. Thanks to all the alert readers who sent me screenshots and asked me, hey, what's up with this? Why are you asking me for a password? All right, let's finally get started. In the words sung by that amazing philosopher, Britney Spears, oops, I did it again. I've descended into madness for the second time in my 20 years of Apple podcasting. I have mind mapped all of system settings in macOS 26.1 Tahoe. I'm going to walk you through how I did it last time, why I did it again, so I could search system settings, and how I improved the process to do it much faster than last time. But you may want to just jump to the mind map without hearing all of the gore behind its creation, so the first link in the post that I'm talking about right now takes you directly to a searchable mind map of all system settings for macOS 26.1. From that page, you can also download the mind map in SVG format to have for your very own, or you can download it in Markdown. When that's opened with Brett Terpstra's Marked app, it's really useful. You can also get it as an OPM file if you favor an outline view. I even provided a ridiculously large PNG image file of the map, which is in no way helpful, but might make a nice poster for the side of a building. If you forget where this page is, when you go to podfeet.com, one of the buttons says Special Pages. This qualifies as a special page, so you can just click on Special Pages, and the first thing you'll see is the mind map of all of system settings. All right, now let's get to the story behind the magic. In 2017, I decided to map all of iOS settings for iOS 11. This gargantuan task took me over a month, working on it for literally hours every single day. When I started, I had no idea it would take so long. You know, when I start a project, I nearly always finish it, even if nobody asked me to do it. When I published my mind map of doom, trademark Donald Burr, I made sure to say that I would not be fixing any typos and that under no circumstances would I even consider trying to keep the mind map up to date as Apple changed it over the ensuing OS updates. I've always been very proud of this mind map, and I smile when other people mention it, even though the admiration often comes with a shake of the head. What kind of person would take on such a task? I also remember calculating that if I printed it out full size on US letter paper, it would have been over 6 feet tall. Now, I did have a problem to be solved when I undertook this next adventure in mind mapping. You've probably noticed that settings has gotten awfully complicated and awfully deep, and it's often quite difficult to figure out where Apple may have buried a setting you seek. As a way to combat this problem, Apple added a search field. But for some reason, the success rate, at least for me, it's only around 72%. You can find some settings using search, but a significant number of searches go unresolved. As I've bemoaned this situation, I've ranted that this should be very easy to implement because there can't be that many words in all of settings, right? It's not like they're having to search something like, say, I don't know, the internet. Well, here's a perfect example. You know how sometimes you need to set the service order of your networks, like moving Ethernet above Wi-Fi? Try searching for that in system settings. You'll be rewarded for your trouble with the message, "No result for set service order. Check the spelling or try a new search." Because I've got my handy-dandy mind map of system settings, I can tell you that set service order is under network, as you might expect, but you have to know to hit the nondescript three-dot menu with the downward chevron that's below the network device listing. Among a few other gems, you'll find set service order. My goal through the magic of mind mapping was to give you a searchable document that would show you exactly how to get the setting you need. As I started noodling around with the idea of going through this pain a second time, remembering the weeks and weeks and weeks of drudgery, I realized that the reason it took so long was that I had to type in every single setting. What if I could create the mind map without ever typing in anything at all? This would require some third-party tools that I already have at my disposal. Before I dig into the tools, I know you're never going to mind map system settings yourself. I've realized that. But as you learn about how I did this, keep the tricks and tools I'll employ in the back of your mind for your own future, different projects. If the goal is to never type any of the text, that means we need a way to copy and paste the original text. System settings, and lots of other applications and tools, doesn't have as selectable text. The App Store, the Music Store, the Books app, every image you see on the internet, all of these have text you cannot select. The good news is that there's several tools for macOS that will allow you to select and copy text from images or from any screen that doesn't normally allow a selection of text. The first one is Text Sniper, and it's from textsniper.app. This is a single-purpose app designed to help accomplish this task. It's $8 directly from the developer, $10 via the Mac App Store, and it's available with a SetApp subscription. Now, I said Text Sniper was a single-purpose app, but it can also read QR codes and translate text to speech. By default, Text Sniper will capture line breaks, but you can toggle that off. We're going to talk a little bit later about why capturing line breaks matters and why it's important in a little bit. Now, the very powerful CleanShot X, designed to take screenshots and record on-screen video, can also capture text from what appear to be inaccessible sources. CleanShot X is available for $30 from the developer at cleanshot.com, and you can get it through a SetApp subscription. CleanShot X's settings include a section for adding keyboard shortcuts, where you can have one to capture text without line breaks and one with line breaks. Now, my go-to screenshot tool is Shotter from shotter.cc. That's SHOTTR. You can use it for free with slightly limited tools and occasional nagging, or you can buy it for the grand sum of $12, or you can be a member of the Friends Club like me for $30. That's completely optional. Shotter also has the built-in capability of selecting an area from which to grab text. By default, Shotter doesn't add line breaks. But if you capture a block of inaccessible text from, say, a website image, line breaks would make each line a separate segment of text, when you'd probably want it as the original paragraph. I think that's why no line breaks is the default. But there are times you would want line breaks. So right after you capture some text with Shotter, a little window pops up at the top of the screen offering to toggle on line breaks. In settings for Shotter, you can reverse the behavior so it defaults to keeping line breaks, but you can press the button after capture to remove them. Kind of a nice compromise. All three of these tools are equally good at copying inaccessible text, and I think it's terrific that we have so many choices on macOS. I use Shotter, but you use what works for you. Now, let's explore how I use Shotter to copy text in conjunction with mind mapping. After the demise of my beloved iThoughts, I moved over to MindNode from mindnode.com. My post on choosing an iThoughts replacement may be my most commented research project. Last December, the folks at MindNode released a new version of MindNode called MindNode Next, but after testing early versions and finding they didn't support all of the capabilities I need, I've stuck with their MindNode Classic version. I really should give MindNode Next another try sometime soon to see how far they've gotten in developing the tool, since it is the future of the product. Now, I want to give a disclaimer. To the very best of my ability, in creating the mind map for system settings, I worked really hard to not include anything specific to the apps and devices on my Mac. However, in a few cases, I took poetic license. For example, I included settings for AirPods and Beats headphones using my AirPods Pro and Beats Fit Pro as these examples. Now, you probably don't have the exact same devices as me, but since there was a whole section for these controls, and they're very different depending on whether you have Apple earbuds or Beats, I thought you would allow it. This ends the disclaimer. Now let's talk about how I use these tools together to capture all of macOS settings in less than a week and maybe 10 hours of work instead of a month of grueling, awful work. I open System Settings on the left side of my screen with my node on the right. In my node, I add a central node with an appropriate title. Once you've added the central node, hitting Enter gets you out of typing mode and selects the current node. Giving a second Enter creates a new child node. If you're not a keystroke person, there's a little plus sign to the right of the node when you hover over it, inviting you to create a new child node. But we're looking for efficiency here because we're going to have to do this hundreds of times. Now here's the first amazing part. At the very top of System Settings, it says Apple Account. Without clicking into System Settings and keeping my node as the active window, I use the keystroke Command-Shift-8 to bring up the crosshairs to select text for Shutter to capture it. I chose that keystroke because it's the same as Text Sniper, which is what I used before I ever added Shutter to my repertoire. Even though you'll be clicking and dragging across the System Settings window, it does not bring System Settings to the foreground. And that's really important because I've got my node open and I've got it in the foreground. I want to stay in my node. I don't want to be switching back and forth. So we now have the text in the system clipboard, and the first top-level node in my node is ready to accept text. Since my node is still in the foreground, we can hit Command-V to paste in the text. Boom! No typing, no clicking back and forth between the two apps. Now, this probably sounds like it's going to take way longer than it would take to just type Apple Account, but when you need to do this literally thousands of times, it goes way faster than typing, and there will be no typos. I have to just hit Enter twice, and I'm ready to enter text for the first child node for Apple Account. Now that was a baby step. I'm going to blow your mind now. One of the advantages of my node is that you can work in mind map mode, outline mode, or view both at the same time. In the upper left of the window, you'll see a little sidebar icon with a drop-down chevron. From that drop-down, you choose mind map and outline. The left sidebar then will show you the outline view while the main window continues to show the mind map view. And we're going to open that side panel because there's one function that works only in outline, and it's the magical step to this process. In System Settings, if we select Apple Account, we'll see a list of 7 items, all of which have chevrons pointing to the right, indicating there are deeper options within. We want to create 7 child nodes off of Apple Account. We could capture them one by one with the process we followed for the parent node, but there's a better way. Switching back to my node as the foreground app, and with the first child node ready to accept text, we can again invoke the text recognition tool with our keystroke of choice. But this time, we're going to drag across all 7 elements in System Settings. Be very careful not to select the icons to the left of the words or the chevrons on the right. We only want to get that text. As soon as we complete this selection area, Shutter will expose a pop-up at the top of the screen that says Text without line breaks copied, followed by the text it copied. Now, all 7 of the items will be all run together, which is not what we want. On the right, you'll see the button that says Add Breaks. If you select that button, it will change to Cut Breaks in case you change your mind. Now, we still have my node as the foreground app with a node ready to accept text, so we simply hit Command-V again to paste text. This time, you'll see all 7 items listed one above the other with line breaks, all in that same node. Now we'll learn why I have the outline view showing in the sidebar. In outline view, if you put your cursor to the left of the last item and hit Enter, it separates that line into a new child node. Simply hitting up arrow once pops you into the section with the 6 remaining items, hit Enter again, and now we have 5. Rinse and repeat, and all of the items are now properly in their separate nodes. Now, I mentioned this can only be done using this sidebar of the outline view. You can't do this Enter thing to create new child nodes over in the mind map side. Now, this was such a huge time saver to get 7 items copied at once rather than copy text, paste 7 separate times. I use this more than hundreds of times to create this mind map. Now, the next step in the process, and this is a really critical step, is to write a blog post all about this subject and talk about how clever you were in the way you did it. As you're meticulously describing every step of copying 7 lines of text and pasting them into a selected node and separating them one by one, discover there's a far easier way you could have been creating multiple nodes all at once. Instead of having an empty child node in the text entry mode, select the parent node, copy the 7 lines from system settings with line breaks, and hit paste. It pastes them as separate nodes. You don't have to paste them as one node and then separate them. I couldn't believe it when I figured this out. I mean, I've spent a lot of time, 10 hours or so, getting this all perfect, and I discover at the end, after I write it up, that was a way better way to do it. Can you imagine how much time I would have saved if I discovered that a week earlier? I'm glad I did learn it, though, if only to teach you a better way. Now, with system settings, not every section with multiple items was as easy to copy as Apple's account's first level was. Often there's a slider or some other element that blocked copying all of the items at once, but when it was possible, it was awesome. Now, here's another critical step. As I was writing up my genius process, Apple released macOS 26.1. Now, surely they wouldn't have changed system settings with a point release, right? I mean, I knew there'd be new releases and I knew there'd be a point release, but they wouldn't put in new settings in system settings. But unfortunately, we know that at the very least, they added a setting under appearance to change liquid glass. Knowing that, it meant I had to check every single setting again. Now, the good news is I found some mistakes on my second pass through, and it turns out I wasn't as thorough on the first half of settings as I was on the second half. Now that I had a faster way to copy multiple settings at once, it was rather fun to be obsessive about capturing absolutely everything. Now, there was one very scary thing as I went through comparing 26.1 settings to my mind map. I started noticing that some sections had the items out of order in the mind map. And it wasn't just once or twice. I'd say maybe 20 or more sections were out of order. Now, my hope is that maybe my method of capturing multiple lines and then separating them borked the order, but there were so many, I'm really doubtful that was it. The worst possible answer is that my node simply has a flaw that's causing this. If that's happened, I can't guarantee it hasn't happened in my final product. I'll be heartbroken if anyone finds errors of that type, but I won't be particularly surprised. I'm not sure what I could do about it if we do find those errors. I had a few more things I wanted to tell you about working with my node on such a massive project. When doing so much repetitive work, keystrokes are a must. While some of my node's keystrokes are intuitive, such as tab to add a child node, left arrow to move up in the tree, command left arrow to move a node up a level in the tree, command up and down arrows to rearrange nodes within the same level, not all of my node's keystrokes are easy for me to remember and execute. For example, to fold and unfold child nodes, you select the parent node and press Option period. If you just want to open one level down, which was often the case with this massive mind map, I needed to close everything up and just show me one level down, and then I could start working in a specific segment. Then Control Option period is your friend. For some reason, I have trouble remembering all of those, and I had to go to the menu a lot more often than I would have liked. When you're working with mind maps, it's nice to balance them on the right and left sides, especially if it's a huge mind map like this one. By default, new nodes all go on the right. But if you drag one of the top-level nodes to the left side, future top-level nodes will continue to be created on the left side. My node adds those new nodes in a clockwise direction. So while the nodes are in order from top to bottom on the right, they're in bottom to top order on the left. Now, it's important that I remembered that, because if I did it the other way around, like if I actively made them top down, then when I created the other formats, like, say, the Markdown version, they would have been out of order. They would have been, reverse order. I discovered something else interesting about my node creating a massive map like this. You can use predefined themes for your mind maps or define your own. I watched Brett Terpstra years ago presenting with a mind map, and he had a gorgeous theme. So I copied it, and I made it my own. They say, copying is the sincerest form of flattery, right? Anyway, it uses pastel colors for the solid nodes on a white background. However, when I was about 75% done with my giant mind map, my node simply got tired, and it made every new top-level node white. I was able to reapply my theme, and it would mostly make the top-level nodes different colors, but eventually it would get tired again and just give me white every time, when normally it was going, pink, purple, green. Each one I would create, it would add a new color. Now they were just a whole bunch of them were white. If a node in my node has children, there will be a little chevron sticking out on the side. I think of it as like a flipper, because if you flip it, it opens and shows you all the children. I discovered completely by accident that if you hover over the flipper, you get a little white pop-up showing you the first 20 or so children within. On smaller sections, it was helpful for a quick scan to look for something, but on bigger sections, it's kind of more of a preview. Now, before we wind this up, there are some fun facts to know and tell about system settings. There are 6,900 words in system settings. That's banana pants. I said up front that there couldn't be that many words for system settings to search in itself, and in that context, I stand by my statement. I think they just don't want to build the lookup table for how to get to all those settings. Here's another fun fact. There are 2,771 individual elements in system settings. No wonder we can't find anything. And do you see why I didn't want to type any of those? 2,771 times I didn't type. Here's another one. The PNG image for all of the settings as 1024 wide is 14,568 pixels tall, and it's 1.5 megabytes in size. At 144 pixels per inch, if printed, that would be about 8.5 feet tall, or 2.57 meters, even bigger than it was for iOS 11. I was curious which top-level sections in system settings had the most elements under them, so I exported the mind map as a markdown file, and then I fed it into ChatGPT. I asked it to make me a markdown table with each section in order and tell me how many elements were below each one. It quickly came back with a beautiful little markdown table. But I don't know if you realize this, LLMs are very bad at math. I thought maybe I'd better check ChatGPT, so I asked Claude to do the same task. And it got completely different answers. I then had ChatGPT combine the two sets of answers into a new markdown table and sort it by ChatGPT's answer just to see if they were at least in the same order of which one was the biggest. You know what? They're not. They both agree that accessibility has the most individual sections, which I think most people know, but after that, their counts are dramatically different for many of the sections. I decided the only way to know the correct answer was to have a human do the counting. But even I'm not that nutty. I realized that many code editors have line numbers. I switched my favorite markdown editor, Typora, to source code mode. Armed with those line numbers, all I had to do was subtract the line numbers between each of the top-level sections. There's 30 sections, so I had to calculate 29 times and hand enter the values into the table. That didn't take too long. Now I had 3 columns of counting, ChatGPT's, Claude's, and mine. I asked ChatGPT to resort the table by the one true way, my counts. Now let's talk about the top 5 sections of system settings by number of sub-elements. They are, drumroll please, nobody's surprised, accessibility at 382 subsections. Keyboard, of all things, is a very close second at 334. Focus takes a surprise third position with 238. General comes in 4th with 205. And one of the most poorly implemented features in all of macOS, screen time, comes in with a whopping 195. I put the table with all of this into the show notes if you really want to see it. And while going painstakingly through every single setting in macOS 26, I discovered 2 applications on the Mac that I never knew existed. And normal humans know about the Applications folder on their Mac. The more seasoned Mac users know that inside Applications there's a folder of Utilities, which are also applications, but maybe used a little more by nerds. Your user directory even has an Applications folder, but it's kind of rare for things to end up in there. However, into my descent into the 7th circle of system settings, I discovered that Apple has buried some applications even deeper. In System Settings, Accessibility, Motor, Keyboard, you'll find a button labeled Panel Editor, and it pops up an app I'd never seen before. Panel Editor allows you to add programmable buttons to the accessibility keyboard that stay on screen. This is such an interesting little app that I'm going to write a separate article about how it works. When System Settings exposed Panel Editor to me, I was intrigued and I wondered, where did they hide it? This is where the fabulous Find Any File from apps.temple.org came to my aid. This $6 app will literally find any file using many different ways to search. I asked it to find Panel Editor as in an app, and it found it buried in, get ready, /system/library/input methods/assistive-control.app, which by the way you can't open, /content/resource/panel editor. I bet that's exactly where you would have looked for it, right? Now the second app I discovered, which isn't quite as interesting to me, is called Directory Utility. In System Settings, Users and Groups, Network Account Server, Edit, you'll see Open Directory Utility. This app is directed at system administrators managing things like Active Directory. Find any file, found it in, /system/library/core services/application/directory utility.app. Now, there's other apps buried in the same core services/applications directory we may explore at some point too. Now, we're getting close to the bottom line, and I'm sure if you like the work I've done here, some of you may be hoping I'll mind map iOS 26 as well. Technically, I might be able to do this using the magic of iPhone mirroring so I can use the Mac to capture the text. I tested it out, and the tools to capture text from iPhone mirroring do work. Whether I will do this is a question I'm not yet ready to answer. Also, since mirroring doesn't work to support iPadOS, settings for iPad is definitely off the table. Now, after I finished the mind map, I realized I didn't have any idea how to post a usable version of it to the web. If it weren't for the genius of Brett Terpstra, this never would have been published. I'm going to do a write-up later on how he got involved and what he did, but I will give you one hint. When you look at the mind map of Doom, there are a bunch of red buttons that allow you to zoom in and zoom out, and you can pan around and scroll on it, and you can reset it back to the center when you lose your place, because you will lose your place with all this with this mind map. All of that is Brett Terpstra's work. None of that was stuff that I did. So without Brett, this definitely would have happened. But it's such a great story, you're going to have to wait 2 weeks to hear it. Now, the bottom line is that rather than a labor of drudgery and misery, I found it rather delightful to capture all of the system settings for macOS. Using tools to do things efficiently is a real joy for me. I'm proud of the end product, and I know I'll be using it to search for settings. Hey, you could create a web app for the page so you can have it right in your dock. If you find it useful in any of the formats, I'd sure like to hear from you. Hey, if you got some money laying around at the end of the month, you just can't figure out what to do with it, why don't you join Patreon and donate it to your favorite podcaster? And then after you do that, why don't you donate some to me? I think that'd be really swell. It's really easy to do. Go to podfeed.com/Patreon and become one of the cool kids. Well, it's that time of the week again. It's time for Security Bits with Bart Busschots. I'm excited today because I asked for a deep dive, right, Bart?
Yes, indeed, and I'm glad you did, because there isn't that much news.
Okay, good. Well, this is something that's been bugging me, and I wanted to know the answer to it, so I just said, Bart, spoon feed me.
But here we shall go. Although first, a little bit of feedback and follow-up. We talked last time about the dangers of agentic browsers. This is where, instead of using AI to tell you things, you have a browser that can browse as you autonomously and interact with your bank and whatever else and do anything you can do and actually buy stuff with actual money. A giant big barrel of, oh my God, this is a terrible idea. Well,
yeah, who thought that was a good idea?
Apparently, ChatGPT. Yeah. So their Atlas browser can be tricked by fake URLs into executing hidden commands. In other words, send you a link, and instead of it just being phishing, it's now, and transfer all of your money to my bank account. Just whatever,
Who did? Shock and horror. Who saw this coming?
I know. And in case you think it's just the two of us, Adam Engst wrote a blog post over on Tidbits, Be Cautious with Agentic Web Browsers. So if you'd like it in Adam's words, that's linked in the show notes too.
Oh, excellent. That's a good way to learn. Okay, great.
Yes. We talked a few times in fear that the EU was going to resurrect an utterly misguided attempt at banning encryption. The Danes had taken over the presidency of the European Union, and they were trying to resurrect this really bad old bill called chat control. And they have now lost in that effort and abandoned it. They've given up. The Dutch had said, heck no. And Joop in our No Silicast Slack was really proud of his nation. Well, the Germans followed suit, and the math doesn't work anymore.
Did you say it was the Danes who did that?
Oh, the Danes are leading the drive, yeah.
But he's from the Netherlands.
Right, but then the Dutch were the first to say no.
The Dutch, okay.
Right, so the Danes are in the driving seat, the Dutch said no, and then the Germans win. They're neighbors.
Okay.
The Danes are from Denmark, okay. They're up the top.
That's what I thought.
The Dutch are from Holland, yeah.
Gotcha, yeah. Okay. I love doing this to Bart. I ask him all the time, okay, explain Holland again.
Oh, God. It's just because Helma's not here.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Anyway, it's
good. That's
dead.
good
This is
news.
great. Yeah. Okay, so you asked me for a deep dive, and it is about apps asking for network access. So I'm going to start by painting some important context because it's important to understand how this happens and why this is now a thing, whereas 20 years ago, no.
So before you start, though, I'm going to describe what prompt, just to make sure everybody knows the window pop-up that I'm seeing that I'm sure everybody has seen before. It says, for example, like 2 minutes ago, allow Keyboard Maestro Engine to find devices on local networks, ? This will allow the app to discover, connect to, and collect data from devices on your network. Allow? Don't allow. And everything from, a painting program to something like Keyboard Maestro that sounds like it might need a network access seem to be asking me this. And I was just curious, what does this mean and how do you decide which ones to say yes to and which ones you should say no to? We've talked about it in the context of like an app that manages your contacts needs access to your contacts, but other apps do not. Your web browser
Right.
should not need that.
Actually, notice something there. The developer told you why they were asking. That's important to remember. Put a pin in that.
Okay, that's not a generic one.
The
I thought
top
that's what
half
they
is
all say.
generic, telling you what is being asked for by what app. And then underneath it in smaller font is the justification. The
And the
justification is from the
develop saying, okay.
developer. The description of who's asking and what they're asking for is from Apple.
Okay. I wish I'd screenshotted more of them to know whether they said something different. I hadn't noticed that. Okay, now you can give us the background.
Okay, so if we teleport ourselves back to 2007, which is now a very long time ago, when the iPhone came out, there were no third-party apps, so any app could do anything because Apple wrote them all and they were all equal. In fact, under the hood, they were all running as root. There was no security. They were just, anyway, those early days. But 1 year later, when they were ready to give us third-party apps, those apps from day one were sandboxed, which is completely different to what was happening on desktop OSs. This was really very novel to trap every single app in its own sandbox. And initially, those sandboxes were completely closed. Like if you moved to another app, which you couldn't do by multitasking, you had to go to the home page with a physical button and then launch another app. The other one was completely dead. Apps could not talk to each other. There was complete isolation. Well, the isolation hasn't gone away. What Apple have done is created little sort of gateways out of the sandbox. So you're still in a sandbox, but you can go through some predefined doors and windows. And some of those doors and windows, or all of those doors and windows, are controlled by something called an app entitlement. So when you submit your app to the App Store, you give them the app and the list of entitlements your app needs. And Apple can look at that list and go, well, hang on a second. This is a flashlight app, and you think you need access to the internet, contacts, calendars, email? I think not. Right? And
No,
the app is rejected.
you've been talking in the context of the iPhone. This is also true of the
Bear
Mac.
with me, I'm telling a story. We're in
Okay.
2007 still.
Okay, so there's nothing. Okay. Sorry.
Right? Yeah. So that was initially how everything was done. And that's actually pretty powerful because it stops egregious abuse, right? Absolutely egregious abuse is stopped with just entitlements and Apple just reviewing the entitlements. But as the iPhone matured, Apple realized that that actually isn't good enough because there's no transparency for the user. You don't know what entitlements Apple gave an app. And if Apple judged that it was okay for this app to have access to your contacts, maybe it's something like, say, an app from Meta or something, it has a legitimate need. Apple couldn't say no, but you might not want to say yes.
Right. Do I want to upload Bart's contact information to Facebook?
Yeah. And that's where these prompts came from. Apple basically went, you have an entitlement, but the entitlement doesn't get you the data. It gets you the right to ask for the data.
So we used to get specific prompts, right? Is that what you're
We
talking
still
about?
do.
Where they'd say,
Yeah.
okay.
And so that's where the prompts come from. They are conditional entitlements. So Apple give you the right to ask the user.
Got you.
And the asking of the user is done by the operating system. So Apple controls those dialogues, which is why they're secure and safe. And they're
Mhm.
basically controlling access in and out of this sandbox. And over time, more and more and more things have been delegated to this kind of you get permission to ask permission. And Apple have gotten very clever. And it's not just yes or no anymore. You can now say, yeah, allow this app those 5 contacts. Allow this app
Oh.
this album.
Photos. Yeah, photos will
Yeah.
do that where it'll say, no, I'll let you pick, but you don't get all of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or with location, apps can ask for all of your
Duration.
location, and you can say, well, actually, you can have an approximate one, but you're not actually getting my
Right.
fine-grained details.
Well, and also for how long?
That too.
Just while using the app or indefinitely?
Yeah, exactly. So Apple have made these prompts ever more clever, but ultimately the developer asks for the right to ask, and then the operating system takes the user's preference and enforces that on the app because they're sitting in its little sandbox.
Think about how deep and complex that truth table is. That's
Very.
a lot because it's a lot of different kinds of permissions in different kinds of categories. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So when Apple took the iOS App Store to the Mac, they brought the sandboxes with them, which for the history of macOS was a huge change. All of a sudden, apps were in a sandbox instead of just running straight on the operating system. And initially, the sandboxing was an opt-in. If you, developer, would like your app to be more secure, why don't you opt into this little tick box in Xcode? And then it became a suggestion, as in, we really think you should, and the tick box was on by default. And then it became, if you don't run in a sandbox, we're going to make the user say okay in this big scary prompt. And now it's got to the point that if the app isn't sandbox, you actually have to go into you can't even do it by clicking on the app. You actually have to go into the settings app and then allow it from there.
Right.
So now we've arrived in a world where the Mac apps are sandbox too. And we've arrived in a world where Apple spent a lot of time unifying the entitlements. So most
Is this
of the
only
time,
apps in the App Store or is this all apps?
No. This is now all apps, right? So you're describing
Okay.
how Apple slowly got us to the idea from there are no
Got you.
sandboxes to you're completely trapped. And they've been sort of harmonizing the entitlements between the two OSs. So here in 2025, you're going to see awfully similar prompts on your Mac, your iPad, and your iPhone. When they ask for contacts, you get the same options. When they ask for photos, you get the same options. Allow all of it, allow some of it. And this dialogue you've just described is another one that is unified across both OSs. So I think it was on the iPhone first because it goes back to iOS 14, but it has been on the Mac since Sequoia.
Okay. I don't seem to run into it very often on my iPhone. I mean, I'm looking at the screenshot you put in the show notes, and it does look familiar, but I get it just all the time on my Mac. It just every day.
Well, if
So
you think about the kind of apps you tend to run on a Mac, they tend to be the kind of apps that do more bigger things, which tend to have more reasons to want to talk to other things on your network. So it's a different, race car versus truck sort of a thing.
yeah, and I may install more apps that do more big girl things as well.
Yeah,
Your
you have a
keyboard
bigger screen,
maestros
more
and
power, although they're not more powerful anymore. It's so weird that my laptop and my iPad have the same oomph. They have
yeah.
the same abilities.
Actually, no. Your iPad is ahead. You have an M5 iPad, don't you?
That's true. Yeah. Yeah, my
Yeah,
even my
your
MacBook
sorry
Pro is an
old laptop.
M4,
Jeez.
and my Mac Studio here is an M2. I think it's
See?
an M2. Might even be an M1. Oh God, about this Mac. Sorry, I want to know now. Oh, it's an M1. Oh.
Yeah, but you don't need a new one, Bart.
I really don't, Alison. This thing does not struggle at all. This is a beast.
No.
Okay, where was I? Right.
All right.
So
this is why they started asking certain kinds of questions. But
Yeah.
then,
and now we have this specific question. So what are they actually asking for? Well, this tends to confuse people who have a little bit of, not a little bit of, this tends to to confuse people who are technically really quite savvy, but are not specialists at app development or networking, because you philosophically know that if your Mac is talking to the internet, it has to be going through your LAN. Like
Right.
you would imagine that if this app has access to the internet, it must have access to my LAN.
But that's not the question it's asking.
It's not. Well,
It's asking questions. It's asking to find and connect to devices on the local network. That to me is a different question than going through the LAN to get out.
okay, then you are ahead of the typical person, because most people
Oh,
assume that if you can get to the internet, then you must be on the LAN. How can you possibly
we,
not be allowed to do stuff on the LAN but be allowed onto the internet? That's how I get to the internet. How can there be different rules in those two things, and how can the rules on the LAN be stricter by default than the rules about the internet? Most people struggle with that. You don't. I'm not going to make you struggle. Don't struggle.
oh no, I accidentally understood something.
Yeah, so at an actual, oops, excuse me, I accidentally rolled my chair into my desk and you just went wobbling everywhere.
Could you guys hear that in the
Yeah, I don't
audio
know how good the
audience?
boom arm is at isolating noise.
Not
That'd be
didn't hear it.
interesting. Wow. Okay. Um, sorry, I lost my own train of thought there. I whacked it away, literally. So when you ask when an app asks the operating system for permission to connect to something over the network, the operating system does that through the sandbox, and the operating system, your Mac, knows whether an IP address is on the internet or on the LAN, and so your Mac is perfectly free to have different rules for both types of connection, which is exactly how it works. There is an entitlement for the internet, which is one that you are just granted by Apple, and there's never a user pop up for the internet. Apps that need
Good.
network access just ask for it in the App Store submission, and Apple say yes, right? It's
Okay.
gone. But the one for access to your local area network, that one is one where Apple gave them the right to ask you. And so the OS just knows whether it needs to ask you or not based on where you're connecting to. And then the second thing is, this permission isn't just allowing you to connect. It's also allowing you to do something that an app just can't do without this permission, which is to scan. It's proactively seeking things on your LAN.
Okay.
And so that's even more of a permission it's asking for. It's not just asking for the ability to connect to something it knows about. It's asking for the ability to sniff around and to basically discover what's on your LAN.
All right.
So that's what
So
it's
how do I,
asking for.
so my main question is, how do I parse when to say yes and when to say no?
Right. Okay. So that's exactly the next thing in the show notes. How do we answer? Right. So we now know what it's asking for. And actually, one more thing to say is the reason it needs permission to scan is because all of our networks use DHCP. So if it didn't have permission to scan, an app would need to ask you, what is the IP address of whatever it is I need to talk to on the LAN? And how many of us human beings know the IP addresses inside our own networks these days? I mean, they're assigned out random when the device power is on, and they could change tomorrow, right? We don't know them. I don't know them.
Right.
So that's why scanning is so important. Otherwise, this is just be pointless. So it's going to ask you, and one of the things to bear in mind is that in that dialogue you quoted to me there, and in the one in the show notes, there's two parts to the dialogue. There's a bit in bold, which is from the operating system telling you what is happening.
Mhm.
And it will have in quotation marks the name of the app. So that's who's asking. The operating system says what they're asking. And then in smaller text underneath is the bit the developer got to write as part of the App Store submission. And that is why they say they want this access. And the developer can choose to be as verbose, or they can be as bad at being human friendly as developers sometimes are. But that piece of information is your first clue as to how you feel about this request. And so you should read that to see why is it asking? And there will be different reasons. And I have a list a little bit further down the show notes of just the ones that I could think of off the top of my head of why an app might give you as a user value by having this ability. And you'll start to see how different classes of apps suddenly fall into place when you look at the different things this could let developers do.
Okay.
But ultimately, the answer is it depends. And you kind of have to look at the app and go, well, do I trust you? And is this even functionality I care about? Because one of the nice things is that Apple say in their doc that if you don't give the app access, it's not the end of the world. The app will still function. It's just some of its features won't work. And in fact, it will not be completely cut off from your LAN because it actually explicitly says that AirPrint, AirPlay, AirDrop, and HomeKit will still work to your LAN.
Wait, what
So
says that? Where do I see
Apple
that?
support document linked in the show notes.
Oh, I didn't know we were talking. Okay.
So it actually says if you don't want to allow access, or if it's not clear to you why the app needs access, you can tap Don't Allow. The app can still use the internet or interact with the local net using a system service such as AirPrint, AirPlay, AirDrop, or HomeKit. So you're not cutting it out of the Apple universe. You're not blocking the app from using Apple's protocols, which Apple has secured and Apple has protected. You're cutting it out of using anything else on the LAN that is not part of Apple's ecosystem. So that's interesting. So you could still use your speakers and stuff without this permission. So why might you want this? Now, this is a list of the things I could think of based on my experience of why apps want this kind of permission. So any kind of third-party alternative to AirPlay, like Chromecast, like Samsung Smart View, like networked speakers that don't use AirPlay, so garbage from Sonos.
What about just Bluetooth?
Well, Bluetooth isn't part of the LAN. That asks you for Bluetooth permission. It doesn't ask you for LAN permission.
Bluetooth so maybe not garbage. Maybe like Sonos, which is not at all garbage, but it has its own protocol.
Sorry, I am so angry with Sonos after taking my really expensive speakers and turning them into buggy, unusable pieces of...
Yeah. But it's an example of a protocol that works extremely well, according to the people who've dropped millions of dollars on the devices, or used to use. I don't want to get into a whole debate about that.
No, it used to. It used to, I know.
My point is that's an example of a communication protocol that does use the LAN that's not AirPlay.
Correct. Other ones that are quite common by not me or you would be Xbox console streaming, where you basically have an Xbox somewhere in the house and you can play it on your iPad, but the iPad is basically just a remote screen and it's actually running on your console, but you're sitting on the comfort of your couch on your iPad or on your iPhone or whatever. So that's using a totally custom protocol. There's a similar one called PlayStation Remote Play. Same idea. So they're third-party alternatives just to AirPlay. If you run your own media server and you're using something like Plex or MB, they're going to want to actually access your server directly on the LAN to get your media.
That one makes sense.
You might have some IoT devices that are not using HomeKit or Matter. So there might be some older devices that invented their own thing. There's a lot of
Zigbee.
Stuff. Yes. Yeah. I mean, depending on how that's bridged, if that bridge uses Matter or not, it may or may not be sitting on your Wi-Fi. If it's sitting on your Wi-Fi, then it may need this permission. Printers that don't use AirPrint, like you may install an app from your printer vendor that talks straight to the printer over some other protocol that's not AirPrint. They're going to need this kind of access because how else are they going to talk to the
That's
printer?
only... I just played back in my head something you've been saying is, are you talking only Wi-Fi?
Network. Now, physically
you
on
said
the
Wi-Fi,
phone,
so that's why in the previous one, and so that's why I'm triggering on that word. If I talk directly to my printer over Ethernet, it wouldn't need to ask this question, or it would?
It would.
My printer
Absolutely
software.
It would. LAN is a concept in my house.
Good. Gotcha. Okay. So that one, again, I think I'd be able to tell I want to talk to a printer that's on the network. I would need access to talk to the LAN. That one makes sense.
Yeah. If you have an app that might want to read files from a PC or from some sort of a NAS device,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a media player app. Maybe it's a PDF reader app. Maybe it's a writing app that wants to be able to interact with stuff on a Windows file share sitting on your Windows laptop. Maybe it wants to talk to media you're sharing on your NAS. It's not unreasonable to have a sort of a
Well, don't.
generic editor that wants to write stuff not to iCloud.
But hang on. Any old text editor I get from anybody will be able to open files from my LAN. I don't have to give it
Will it?
permission to when I go file open and I get the Apple file dialog box and I go to my
Okay.
Synology.
No. So when you do Apple File Open, you have punched through the sandbox. So Apple doesn't
It's
ask
not
you if
Apple
you
file open. It's file open from
Okay,
within
sorry.
Typora.
On the Mac?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a question. So on the Mac, when you use the file menu, you bypass the sandbox because Apple sees that as deliberate user interaction. So you are
Got you.
punching
Okay.
through the file. You are punching through
Okay.
right there.
So you're talking about some other.
An iPad
Kind
app
of.
wouldn't have that, right? An iPad app tends not to have those kind of dialogue. So if you have an iPad app that allows you to read stuff from a Windows file share, a lot of interesting PDF converters offer to connect to your SharePoint and get your file, right? They all start asking for these kind of permissions.
Okay. All right.
Perhaps not legitimately. Another one that's not me or you is multiplayer games. They may want to seek out other players. And the other things is anything with a hardware companion or a remote app. And believe it or not, PowerPoint is an example here because you can play PowerPoint from your laptop and control it from your phone, which means your phone has to talk to your laptop to tell it next slide. Well, that connection is not happening over AirPlay or something. That's happening over Microsoft-y, protocol-y Magicus, right? So that needs LAN access. Or a hardware clicker. That's probably sitting on your LAN if it isn't Bluetooth. Maybe it's Bluetooth, but if you're in a big auditorium, maybe it's sitting on the Wi-Fi and there's like a network connection to do the hardware clicker.
I'm trying to see, like, of the 3 I saw in the last 20 minutes. Yeah, they come fast and furious. I should have taken 40 screenshots so I could check all of them to see whether they fit. My Stream Deck asked for that question, but my Stream Deck has buttons on it that I tell it to do something somewhere, and it could be anywhere. And same with Keyboard Maestro. It could be triggering a shortcut or something, a script that does something.
If I was writing those apps, I'd ask them to ask for every entitlement so that I could have plugins in my library of things to make the buttons do just about anything, right?
Well,
those apps.
There is a plugin library in the Stream Deck software. You go to
That's what I mean.
To the web and you install it.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is those apps
button
probably ask for massive entitlements so that those libraries can be really complete. Whether any of your exact buttons are doing it doesn't necessarily matter. The app may just ask.
But even if it's turning a light on and off.
Yeah.
That's on
if
your
it's
network,
over Philips Hue instead of over HomeKit. Oh, God.
Now that I can hear.
Yeah, that's my brother who is he doesn't understand the concept of texting me, but he's installing his new Mac and wants to know if he has to run an installer before it's actually installed. And I'm not making this up. I love him to bits, but he's really, really, really not
needy.
He's been very needy today.
Yeah. So back to focusing on this. So when I said if it turns a light on and off, you're saying it's only if it's using HomeKit, it wouldn't need to ask that question?
No, because HomeKit's
this is getting more complicated, not less complicated. I'm getting more confused. Because how do I know whether an app is using Apple protocols or not?
Well, if it is, it won't need to bother asking, so it won't ask.
Okay.
If it's asking, it means it's not.
So Keyboard Maestro.
Right, that's an app that's trying to be an everything machine. So it's probably asking for all the entitlements it can think of so that it can do everything.
Yeah, it says discover, connect to, and collect data from devices on your network.
Yeah.
Now, I know what Keyboard Maestro does, and I would say yes to that because I know it's going out and tickling all kinds of things on my network, but that's why it has to be written so broadly.
Yeah, because that's an everything app. I mean, how do you describe in one little paragraph to fit in that dialogue what Keyboard Maestro does? That is such a Swiss Army knife of an app.
Yeah. Okay.
So the obvious question in all of these kind of it depends is, well, why don't I just always say yes then? I mean,
Hmm.
that's one answer, right? Why am I even being asked this if it's so useful for all of these possible use cases? Well, the answer is because it comes with risks. And auga, the biggest one is privacy. Because a little scan of your network is very revealing. So if you imagine all of those advertisers trying to build up profiles on you to sell to everyone on the internet all the time, everywhere, they would love to know that your house is full of, say, HP printers, Dell laptops, Samsung TVs, a home weather station, a 3D printer from so-and-so, a smart fridge from Electrolux, yada, 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 right? They could really tell a lot about you. My house, they discover a sous vide from a Nova, so they'll be, oh, he likes cooking. I'm going to try sell him some really expensive cooking stuff. And, someone else's house, they'll discover, oh, God only knows what, a smart telescope. Oh, we can sell him a whole bunch of really expensive stuff, right? God knows
Hmm.
what you find. But it's very revealing about us. So that scan part of this permission means that you don't want to just open this up to life, the universe, and everything. You actually do want to read a little paragraph that says, well, why am I asking? And then the other thing that I'm just going to say, I don't think this is a bigger risk compared to privacy, but I have to say that if you're the kind of person who just assumes that their home network is a completely private place and has utterly ignored the fact that IoT devices have made that not true for a decade and a half now, but if you're the kind of person who assumes it's safe and will have a machine with a file share without a password that contains really sensitive information, well, you've just opened up that sensitive information to every app you give this permission to, hypothetically. I mean, the app would have to be actually malicious and would actually have to go looking, but it's a risk.
Okay. I'm a little confused by the way you wrote it in the show notes. You said, if you're the kind of person who assumes the land is safe, there may also be a small security risk.
Hmm.
Do you have file shares with sensitive information accessible without a password? If you ever have guests or if use any IoT devices, you really shouldn't do things like that. What is you really shouldn't do things like that? Like what?
I have stuff open without passwords. You could reword. That's me basically going, if you're the kind of person who's being really, really, really dangerous anyway, then you're also being dangerous in this way. Do you get what I'm saying?
Okay. Yeah, I do. It sounded like it was referring back to something else. Okay.
So, really, I don't think this is one to stress about very much. Because if you deny the access, you're not really breaking the app that much, probably, unless it's really obvious. Like if you have an app for a Canon printer and it says, hi, I'd like to talk to the network, and you say no, and it says, I can't find your printer. Well, there's no mystery there, right? Or in fact, you're unlikely to have been very confused in the first place. But if you have a game and you don't do any multiplayer, you just want to get some bananas or something in your game, and it says, hi, I'd like to scan your network, you go, actually, no. And the game works fine. Yeah, whatever. Right, work away.
So I've been just using the random approach. I say
The
yes
random,
every other time and no every other time because I don't understand it. And I've never had anything come back and later on say, you didn't give me that permission. And I also, um, I'm getting ahead of you a little bit. You say in the show notes that I can go change it in security. Where?
So the higher in the show notes, there's support articles from Apple for iOS and macOS that tell you where, but it's always in the security and privacy in that same place where it lists like screen sharing permission and
Okay.
all of those other permissions. They're all together in both OSs.
Having literally just gone through every single one, I don't remember seeing one for LAN access. I'm scanning through. Local network. There it is.
Yeah.
Oh, we can figure. Visual Studio Code asked me, and I said no. Would Visual Studio Code need it?
File shares. Imagine you're in an office where the code you're working on is sitting on a Windows file share.
So
You
I
now
don't
can't
care.
access it on that Windows file share.
So
Exactly.
so if I'm not using Windows file sharing, I don't need to say yes to that. That's
Or
the
maybe
only
SSH
reason.
from within VS Code. Basically,
Okay.
my general feeling is that this access is usually for bonus extra features for the uber nerds.
Okay. Slack. Why would Slack need access to my local area network?
Again, if you use Slack in its office, like a lot of people use Slack as their corporate communication tool, and they want to access file shares.
Okay.
They say it is an office tool. You don't. You and I don't. We use it purely personally. But if you were using
Okay.
Slack in work, you'd want that.
Microsoft Edge.
Same thing. Browse through
It has
like your
this is
custom.
to do with Windows.
Yeah. A lot of this stuff is going to be like your corporation's private SharePoint server. That's going to be on the LAN.
So I
You're
can
gonna
blame
wanna view
Microsoft
that.
for all of this confusion then. It sounds like everything that I wouldn't have known. It's
I'm not. No, that's not quite right. A lot of this stuff comes down to the fact that these apps have a dual life as Office apps,
Corporate
and
tools.
therefore they will
Okay.
want to talk to stuff private to a corporation, which will be on the LAN. And
Okay.
in 2025, a lot of that's Microsoft junk, but it doesn't have to be.
Okay.
And if you were to be the kind of person who installed games, you'd see apps asking for very, very different reasons. They wouldn't be asking to find SharePoint. They'd be asking to find other players or your server or whatever.
Okay. I feel better. But I just turned a couple of them off based on that.
And the thing is, if suddenly they pop up and go, if you click a button and the moment you click the button, it pops up and it'll ask you again. Well, okay. Now you know.
And then at
it's
least
that
you're in the
button.
context of yes or no.
Yeah.
You get a better idea. That's good. I've also learned, if nothing else, to start reading more carefully the small print, because I have never read the small print. I've just assumed they all said the same kind of thing. Oh, I want to do whatever I want on your LAN. It never occurred to me to read them. Okay.
Yeah, that's the bit the developer gets to write. Apple write the big bold auga, and the developer writes the small print.
Good.
So that's kind of, where I've basically landed is I generally just look at the app. And if I go, I've been using this app for 20 years, this developer is amazing, it's Brett Terpstra or someone like that, I just go, yeah, whatever. And if I look at it and I go, I barely use this app, I doubt this is critical to the app's functionality, I might be cutting off a niche feature 5 people use, sod off. And I don't stress about it, because if I guess wrong, I can turn it back on.
I think that's the most important thing we probably learned here is if you guess wrong, go to privacy and security, local area or local network, and turn it back on.
Yeah.
Or off. Like I did
or off.
Now.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Good. Thank you, Bart. That answered all my questions.
Yay. And as I say, good thing too, because we don't have that much else to talk about. We do have some action alerts. So if we put you to sleep, wake up. If you have Apple devices in your life, patch. Apple released Apple OS 26.1, which updates, lots of bug fixes. So maybe you have a few less bugs in your life this week, maybe. But also security fixes. So patch. And if you're running some slightly older stuff, there are also security patches hiding in iOS 18.7.2 and the iPad equivalent. Oh, and that's it, actually. So just those 2.
Okay, good. By the way, hot tip. The Apple TVs don't seem to auto-update, like when you have auto-update on. I've had to manually do all 5 of mine twice now with 26 and then 26.1.
They won't upgrade to 26 for another couple of months, probably. And they will eventually do the security updates when they
think so.
feel like
Yeah,
it.
they did. They haven't this time, but they used to. Anyway.
Yeah, give it.
If you don't see the new shiny, go poke it.
Go poke it. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're a Twitter user, or if you're like me, you keep your account active so it can't be squatted by someone. And if, like me, you like to keep it secure so that people can't impersonate you on these services and therefore set up passkeys, because of Elon's thing with changing the name, all of your passkeys are going to stop working on November 10th because the domain name is changing. They are killing twitter.com, which means your passkey, which is bound to a domain, is now bound to the domain that the app is going to stop supporting.
So just passkeys, not regular 2FA.
Not the code style 2FA. If you have a passkey in hardware, like a YubiKey or something, which is, I think, a very small number of people, but if that is a FIDO key, then it is the same as a passkey, and then you have the same problem.
Okay. I haven't been into X since passkeys got invented, so I don't think
I logged in to set up a passkey, put some Zs at the end of my username to indicate that I'm not really here. And I
Oh,
log in once a month
just to
so
make sure
that
he
my
doesn't take
account.
it away.
Precisely. Yeah.
Yeah, but then he's going to count me as an active user.
Yeah. Look, I think the risk to when you're a Z-rate celebrity, I think it's important to protect your identity.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a right answer, but that's what
Okay.
I've chosen. We mentioned in the previous installment that there had been Pwn to Own in Dublin. Actually, no, it was in Ireland. I think it was down in Cork. It was Pwn to Own with lots of shamrocks. And we said that, there were scary vulnerabilities found in QNAP NAS devices and that they would be patched within 90 days because that's how this works. Well, right, 2 weeks later, they are patched. So if you run a NAS, you have 7 nasty vulnerabilities that have fixes for you. So patchy, patchy,
Okay.
patch.
All right.
If you are still, today, a Windows 10 user, then you have spent the time since last Patch Tuesday in a kind of an interesting limbo where you got updates last time, but that was going to be the last time ever unless you took proactive action to proactively move yourself onto something called ESU, or Extended Security Updates. Even in Europe, where this is free, you must proactively enable ESU. So if you're just waiting on stuff to happen, next Tuesday is Patch Tuesday, and you will be left unpatched unless you have taken action. Bleeping Computer do a way better job than I ever could of explaining all the different ways that people can get it for free, even if they're not in Europe, and what you have to do to turn it on.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that's not too many people, but
Nah.
people have older hardware or whatever, so it's not going to be 0. So there you go.
Okay. All
Where
right.
the warnings land then, Have I Been Pwned have added one of their biggest pieces of information, and I'm not using the word breach, which is breaking a lot of people's brains because they think, have I been pwned? Breach. There has been a massive breach. There have been awful fake reports of a Gmail breach. Absolutely, positively did not happen. Something really cool and useful has happened, but it's not a breach. What's happened is good security researchers have been proactively scanning the dark web and cataloging all of the username plus password pairs that are being trafficked by cybercriminals. And they've gifted all of them to Troy Hunt for Have I Been Pwned, which is an interesting gift because it cost him a lot of money to process that much data in a modern cloud environment. That is actually 2 billion credential pairs is actually an amazing amount of data processing to get all of that indexed properly and into the system. So he actually has a blog post explaining quite how difficult it is to deal with data of such catastrophically large volumes. A lot of this data is old. He always does a little random sampling where he emails people in the dump to ask if the information is true because it has their email addresses. And a lot of them said, oh yeah, that is genuinely my password from a decade ago. So this seems to be data that's been floating around for a while. But if you haven't used something like, say, 1Password Watchtower feature in a while, now's a good time because those 2 billion records are in Watchtower now because they're in Have I Been Pwned. And so now it's just a good time to use any tool that feeds off that database to give you useful information. So Watchtower is one. Other password managers also have integrations to Have I Been Pwned, so they will have a similar feature with different branding. It's just a good time now to do a little bit of a health check on your passwords.
So this is what I know. He's doing God's work here, but I never know what to do when I get these. So of course if you're on the planet, you probably got one of the Have I Been Pwned email messages, or you're in this database because it's 2 billion people. Sorry, 1.96 billion to be precise, not 2. When when actually, yeah. So anyway, I got that and I follow the link and it tells me what the thing is and it says compromised data, email and passwords. You should change your password. Where?
Okay, so this is why I'm suggesting a tool. There is more data in there because the specific passwords have been added. Watchtower will check if your password matches the actual password in the breach. There's also an API to do that through an API, but that's difficult. So the answer for human beings is to use a tool like Watchtower that has integration, because it's not just going to tell you that you're in the site that was breached. It's going to tell you if your current password is still the one that has leaked. That's actionable information. So Watchtower will tell you this actual password here is leaked.
Okay. So I'm looking at Watchtower. What am I looking for? It says
If it's
one
not
account's missing a
augaing
recovery
at
code,
you,
11 reused passwords, 6 weak passwords, 23 passkeys available, 33 two-factor authentications I don't have, and 4 expiring items.
okay, then no problem. If you had one of those breached passwords, Watchtower would have at the top of its list, breached password.
Okay. So, but again, have I been pwned doesn't help me at all. It doesn't provide me any actionable information. It's just
That's
like
not fair
there's a
because that's how
40
Watchtower works. That's how Apple's features work. That's how all of these password managers are able to give you actionable information. And you
because
as a human,
it's got have I been pwned in it. But the emails, signing up for those emails just alarms me and I follow them and then I can't figure out what to do because I go look at the thing and it goes, change your password. But it doesn't tell me where my password was compromised. Just
right? Okay, so this is an unusual situation because for most of Have I Been Pwned's existence, what the notification says, your password was caught up in the Neiman Marcus breach.
okay.
So you now know exactly what's broken. This is
Okay.
unusual.
This is so big, it's just assume it's everywhere.
Right, but it's also
Or-
not a specific breach, which is why this kind of breaks the model. So that's why the API now
it's the
exists
collection.
to allow stuff like Watchtower to dig deeper. And that API is actually available to you if you want to write a little bit of code of your own. But this is why Troy Hunt's advice in his blog post is actually to leverage features like Watchtower because they can get the full value from Have I Been Pwned. And it's becoming because the only way to do Troy doesn't tell the API doesn't say here are your breached passwords. The API works the exact opposite way because it's all using hashing. So the API lets you check if a password is breached. It doesn't tell you all
and the only
breached
place that
passwords.
hash can be created is from 1Password.
From somewhere that
So-
knows your password.
Yeah, he doesn't tell you any of that. When you get this email, you go and it's just, here's what happened. Got
Yeah.
compromised email addresses and passwords. And then 1Password is a sponsored post on that page. So I wouldn't have thought that was him saying, hey, you should look at 1Password at Watchtower. I'd have to
Okay.
know to go find his blog post, which unless I was
Yeah.
listening to Security Bits, I wouldn't know.
And in this case, you're completely correct, and it's because of the nature of this data, but this is atypical because the typical notification from Have I Been Pwned is this specific website has been breached, and it's this email address of yours on that website. And that's very actionable for everyone. It's just that in this case, the data is stuff we found on the internet that we don't even know where it was stolen from.
Okay.
Okay. Now, the story of the year, I'm rapidly detecting that the thing we will remember about 2025 is it's when the baddies discovered something called ClickFix, where they discovered that human beings have been so broken by CAPTCHAs that they just assume that every weird thing something pretending to be a CAPTCHA asks them to do must be real. That is what is being abused by ClickFix. It is the fact that CAPTCHAs have trained us to just give up and go, oh, whatever. Whatever you want, I'll do it. Just let me see the cat video.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a new technique. They just keep getting better at this. And the only thing I can say, Alison, is follow the link and look at that screenshot. This is just getting evil good. So the only thing I think we can do is to tell all of our friends and family, if something tells you to copy and paste something into some sort of a text box you don't understand, the answer is no, heck no. Because that's what these all end
Okay.
up trying to do. But just look at how convincing those emails are now. Or those, sorry.
Okay, hang on. Well, I don't want to leave the audience in the lurch here. So the screenshot is an orange Cloudflare supposedly window. It says on your macOS computer, press Command Space, type terminal, and press return. Run the verification. I'm not sure unsophisticated users would do that. I mean, enough must that it's working.
I'm afraid to say we know it works because these attacks are succeeding.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that just to be aware, this is the trend of the year. And they're just getting so convincing. Also, something to bear in mind, and there is a takeaway. And I'm going to actually, since I want people to remember the takeaway, why don't we start with the takeaway? If a URL has even one weird character, by which I mean something you don't see on your keyboard, run away. Treat it as malicious. The reason is because it is possible abusing the bidirectional nature of some languages. So there are languages that go right to left, and there are languages that go left to right. If you mix both into a URL, you can make the URL display the file path before the domain name. So normally I tell people look for the bit before the first slash. So google.com/anything is google.com.
Right.
Well, with this reverser trick, you can make hackersite.com/google.com look like google.com/hackersite.com. You can swap them around that slash.
Ew.
But
they need to stop this.
Yeah, the browsers none of the browsers fix this at the moment. All of them are now scrambling.
Yeah.
But the important thing is for this to work, there must be a weird character somewhere in that URL. You can't do that kind of a switcheroo without using a character from Arabic or one of these languages that goes the other way. So there has to be a really weird character in the URL for this to work.
So it can't do what you just typed in. It can. Literally hackersite.com/google.com and make it
see where I have /hackersite.com. That's where any other random glop could appear, and that random glop, somewhere in that random glop, has got to be hiding a weird character, a piece of Arabic or something. Otherwise, it can't work.
Okay. Yeah, we might want to rewrite that a little bit because that would be like pipe. Would pipe do it? Or it has to be a Arabic character.
Pipe's on your keyboard.
Well, people have keyboards with Arabic characters. What are we saying?
Okay, that's why I said an AZERTY or a QWERTY keyboard in the show notes. If it's a Western keyboard,
okay,
stuff that stuff you've never seen. These are characters you don't see.
Okay, yeah, I'm just saying that the ... we could. Well, maybe we can't type that character in because we don't have one.
I couldn't.
Oh, okay, now I understand. Got it. All right.
I mean, I'm sure there's an alt code. I'm sure I could, but I couldn't.
Okay.
Another one. If someone sends you an email with a .lnk file, there is no legitimate reason to do this. This is not a normal thing to do. An LNK file is a Windows shortcut file. It is what is used to make an icon on your desktop point to something. Attackers have found a way to abuse these LNK files. It's a genuine 0-day. There is no patch. The answer is an email with an LNK file goes in the bin. You do not double-click the LNK file.
Okay. So that's like a symlink to Apple people?
Yeah, only as an attachable file because it's actually done with you can open them up and have a poke. There's like a data format for specifying it, but they're horribly open to abuse and a terrible idea. And they shouldn't be an email. There's no legitimate reason to email this to people.
Okay.
And then finally, apparently this is a very popular game, so I'm just going to put it in here. If you play World of Warships Blitz, then they had a whoopsie where they were sending your password unencrypted across the internet. So the advice is very simple. World of Warship Blitz players are advised to update their app to the latest version to stop it leaking your password and reset their account credentials in the game. And anywhere else you reuse the same password you use for Warship Blitz.
Okay.
So that's an easy one. Notable news then, UK have made a big announcement that they're going to make it way more difficult to have spoofed phone numbers for SMS messages and cell phone calls in the UK. And I'll be darned if I can find a technical description of how this is going to work. All I can find in the stories is lots of mention of close cooperation between government. My brother won't even. He's now ringing me so often he's breaking through my silencing.
Oh.
Sorry about that. Sorry, I'm going to reply with message.
Please leave
Not
me
now.
alone.
All caps. There we go. That should do it. Sorry, folks. Right, where was I? So all I can see is lots of talk about cooperation with law enforcement and with government ministers and stuff. Basically, remember that phone tapping was invented on the telephone network. This definitely means that there is less privacy on telephone networks, but there never was any anyway. So having less fraud seems like a good thing. Just don't ever assume that SMS messages or phone calls are private. There's no reason for that assumption.
Okay.
There is an unpatched flaw in Chromium-based browsers that allows a malicious URL to crash your browser. The only danger, there is no possibility of code execution because it's not that kind of vulnerability. It's not an app crash. It's a resource exhaustion. So it can't be abused to actually hack you. It can just make you cranky. In theory, this is an easy fix, so expect patches soon. It's not one to worry about, but if your browser suddenly hangs, force quit it, and I think it's hold down the Option key and it won't load your previous pages.
I don't know. I don't use Chrome, but
well, Chromium, so I guess
Chromium
that means Edge
stuff.
and stuff as well.
Alrighty.
We have come a very long way, Alison, from the days when the entire internet was HTTP and you would switch to HTTPS to log in and then switch back to HTTP. We have now arrived at a world where in a very shortly coming update of Chrome that's already in beta, it will proactively warn you if you go to an HTTP website saying this is insecure, which it is. It's just we used to always work that way. And if you type in a domain name without the HTTP bit, Chrome is going to assume HTTPS. So if you just say google.com, Chrome is going to go to https://google.com.
It hasn't been doing that all along?
No, the default on the internet has always been HTTP because that's how it started in 1980-something.
I never type in HTTP anything. I literally never, ever write it. I always write blah.com. And it always goes to HTTPS.
The website itself sends you a 301 redirect from the insecure to the secure version. So you go insecure, secure.
Right. So what changed?
You don't talk to... Okay. You made an insecure connection to google.com that could be hijacked in theory by an attacker in the middle. And then Google upgraded your security. The browser is now just going to do this. If you give it a blank URL, a blank domain name, it's never going to ask insecurely and wait for the website to upgrade you.
I got you. It's going to skip that. Okay, great.
Yeah, it's great. That's how it should be. The wonderful people at Proton, they're a Swiss company that have great products aimed at privacy. They are launching something called the Data Breach Observatory. This is an alternative to Have I Been Pwned with a different methodology. They are going to scour the dark web and collect what they find. So their data is going to be complementary. And it's going to be really interesting to see what they discover that Have I Been Pwned don't, because that's going to tell you which companies have successfully hushed up breaches, or are so bad at security they themselves didn't know they were breached.
Oh, okay.
So that's going to be really interesting to see how this develops. Passkey support improves a little bit more. Microsoft Edge will now sync your passkeys between different copies of Edge using your Microsoft account. So like iCloud Keychain, Edge is now inheriting this feature. WhatsApp is allowing what they call passwordless chat backups. This is using a passkey to protect your chat history. So that means it needs to do a Face ID or whatever to unlock the passkey to get to your chat history. It's a nice feature. And then we're going to end with another rundown of how AI really is a two-edged sword. So first, the cranky news with the frowny face in the show notes. There is now malware that has been discovered which uses Gemini, in this case, to rewrite itself automatically so that it keeps on confusing antivirus or endpoint protection apps, because it basically uses the LLM to rephrase itself to do the same thing with different code.
Oh.
Deviously clever. But
respect.
Lots of smiley faces. Yeah, but lots of smiley face stories. So these are all ways AI is helping the goodies. Google built-in AI defenses on Android now block 10 billion scam messages a month. There are 10 billion attempts to scam people that never reach them because the AI is going, nope, nope, nope. Wow. I think that's fantastic.
10 billion a month. Were those 10 billion going through before or somebody else was trying to stop them?
Well, I imagine
Like
they're
humans.
trying to send more since the shields are now so much better. So I imagine the attackers respond by having a larger number. But still, this is great because in the past, blocks were always a few would get through, someone would report them, and then they would get blocked. But with the AI blockers, you can detect the suspicious pattern immediately. And so you don't have to let a whole bunch of ones through to the first few victims and then go, oh, whoopsie, and then start blocking it. You can block straight away. So that's a big advantage. Similarly, Microsoft are adding a new little local LLM. And the job of this LLM is to look for the kind of screens that scammers use for the software support scam, where they put up a thing, say, your computer is broken, phone us. And so they're using LLMs to look for that pattern. And if they find it, they will block it before it's a known malicious URL. And in future updates, they will report the malicious URL upstream so that people with devices that can't run a little LLM can also get the block, courtesy of people whose machines are modern enough to have, say, one of the an M series processor or whatever that can do the LLMs using a neural engine or whatever the Windows equivalent is.
So I think that
cool.
there's a real easy rule to put in first. If it's being shown to someone with the user agent that shows they're on a Mac or on an iPhone, and there's an X to close the window, then that's not one for us. You could,
the LLM should learn that pretty quick. Yeah,
that's my favorite.
OpenAI have unveiled something called Aardvark, and the reason is because Aardvark are voracious bug eaters. It is a GPT-5 agent that finds and fixes code flaws. It will send you the Git commits that it thinks will fix the security vulnerability you didn't know was in your code.
Okay, great.
That's amazing. Similarly, because Google AI don't want to be outdone, they have something called Big Sleep, which does the same. It successfully found 5 of the vulnerabilities Apple just patched. In Safari, to be precise. Yeah.
Wait, did it find them before or after Apple patched them?
No. They got patched because Google found them and reported them responsibly. And now we know that's what happened because they've been patched.
Nice. I love it.
Yeah. So, that's 4 big smiley faces for one cranky face. So, yes, AI is dangerous, but it's also helping us. So don't despair.
Good.
And then I have some palate cleansing. So the nation that embarrassed itself in front of the world by naming a state-of-the-art Arctic exploration ship Boaty McBoatface. It was so embarrassing that they didn't name the ship that. They named it the Sir David Attenborough. Good name.
Aw.
And they named the submarine that the Sir David Attenborough carries Boaty McBoatface. So there is a research sub called Boaty McBoatface.
Wait, which nation was this?
The United Kingdom.
Okay.
They have redeemed themselves utterly. They asked the British public to name a train whose job it is to blow leaves off the line, because you might think this is funny, but there is almost nothing as slippery as a compressed leaf. They cause chaos if they're not cleared. And these are called de-leafing trains. The latest one is named Control-Alt-Delete.
That's awesome.
And the public voted for it, so utterly redeemed. There's pictures in the link in the show notes. It goes to Network Rail's Media Center. You can see this Control-Alt-Delete.
So you're saying the reason the UK was bad was that they didn't name it Boaty McBoatface?
No, they did. I'm sorry. They asked the public to name a really prestigious ship.
But they didn't name it that. They named it. They named the submarine that. I think they lost face because they didn't go with what the public wanted.
I was kind of saying the public, by voting for Boaty McBoatface, were the people causing embarrassment. But
it's joy. It's joy.
By voting for Control-Alt-Delete, I forgive everything. I think that's so good.
Okay, maybe because it's a de-leafing train, you'll allow it, but not the prestige ship. Okay, fine.
Yeah. And then finally, if you would like something to listen to, I have a double suggestion. So there has been a really good BBC podcast series called The Lazarus Heists, and it was named after the Lazarus Group, who are the state-sponsored hackers from North Korea who have ended up as the subjects of news stories here for decades. And they pulled off the biggest heist in the history of cybercrime ever. And in fact, it was bigger than the biggest actual physical bank robbery ever. No one has ever stolen enough gold or treasure to be worth more than the North Koreans successfully stole. So they revived the podcast to tell the story of the biggest heist ever. And that alone would have been cool if they just done a 1 hour special. And it's amazing, linked in the show notes. But they did more. They're doing a third series, but they're not continuing the story of North Korea. They've renamed the whole podcast. It's now called Cyberhack, and they have a new story to tell us. They are telling us the story of the largest Russian cybercrime organization.
Cybercrime organization who's been caught? Or...
No, they are very much, they are like the mafia. They are very much alive. We know about them, but we have not caught them.
Okay. How fun.
To be honest,
is it horrifying though?
I find it illuminating because a lot of this ties back to the early days of before the war in Ukraine and during the early days of the war in Ukraine. This is all connected. Cybercrime and the physical world are not two different things. And understanding the geopolitics between Russia and planet Earth without understanding these cyber criminals doesn't really work. So I'm learning a lot of like the big picture stuff falling into place.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. And it's just very well told. They're good storytellers. So even if it gets a little technical, they tell it so well that you just go, oh, okay, I get that.
That's fun. Good storyteller makes all the difference.
Well,
this has been fun. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the learning.
Excellent. And we didn't scare you too much, right? Because at the end of the day, we all know that the answer is always the same. Stay patched, so you stay secure.
Well, that is going to wind us up for this week. Did you know you can email me at allison@podfeet.com anytime you like? I love to get emails. Like when I accidentally post something I shouldn't have. You should send me an email and tell me that. If you have a question or suggestion, just send it on over. Remember, everything good starts with podfeet.com. You can follow me at Mastodon. I'm at podfeet.com/Mastodon. If you want to listen to the podcast on YouTube, where are you going to go? Podfeet.com/YouTube. If you want to join the conversation, you can join our Slack community at podfeet.com/Slack, where you can talk to me and all of the other lovely No Silicast ways. You can support the show at podfeed.com/Patreon or with a one-time donation at podfeed.com/donate, where you could use Apple Pay or any credit card, or you could even use PayPal at podfeed.com/PayPal. And if you want to join in the fun of the live show, you're going to have to wait until November 23rd to head on over to podfeed.com/live on Sunday night at 5 p.m. Pacific time and join the friendly and enthusiastic No Silicastaways. Thanks for listening and stay subscribed.